Ever scroll through social media and think, am I doing this whole life thing wrong?
Right.
It's like this endless parade of perfect vacations and promotions and, oh yeah, perfectly filtered everything.
And everyone just seems so happy.
Right? Exactly. But today, we're ditching those curated highlight reels and, well, we're getting real.
Yeah. We're diving deep into what the research actually says about living a truly fulfilling life.
And we've got some really interesting studies to unpack today.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. They actually challenge this whole idea of happiness being the ultimate goal.
Okay, so right off the bat, we're not talking about those fleeting moments of joy.
Right. Think less about, like, winning the lottery and more about, I don't know, maybe that deep satisfaction you get from, like, mastering a new skill or something.
So it's bigger than just happiness.
Way bigger. It's about this deeper, more enduring sense of well-being. We're talking about eudaimonic well-being.
Eudaimonic well-being. All right, so what does that even mean? Break it down for us.
Okay, so eudaimonia. It's about living a life that's aligned with your values. You know, it's about meaning, purpose, virtue. It's not just about feeling happy, it's about feeling fulfilled.
Okay, so give us a real-world example. What's the difference between, say, eudaimonia and just plain old happiness?
Okay, picture this. That feeling of pure joy after eating a big old piece of chocolate cake.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right, that's what we call hedonic happiness, pure in-the-moment pleasure. But eudaimonia, that's more like, I don't know.
Like that feeling when you finally finish a challenging project?
Yes, exactly. Or that deep contentment in a strong relationship. Or maybe the quiet fulfillment of helping others.
It's like the difference between a sugar rush and a nourishing meal.
Yeah, perfect analogy. One gives you a quick hit of energy, but the other truly sustains you.
And it seems like this idea of sustenance is a big theme in the research you gave us.
Huge. And it all comes back to this idea of living in line with your values. Remember that paper by Ryan and his colleagues?
Yeah, the one that talks about a hierarchy of values.
That's the one. See, they argue that we all have these fundamental beliefs that underpin our choices, right?
Like those deep-seated whys behind everything we do.
Exactly. You keep asking yourself why enough times, and eventually you hit this core value that you just can't explain away. It just is.
And what I found really interesting is that the research suggests that even achieving things that on the surface seem super important, they might not actually lead to eudaimonia if they clash with those core values.
100%. Like, imagine landing your dream job. Sounds amazing in theory, right? But what if it meant, like, never seeing your family or having to compromise your ethics?
Suddenly not so dreamy anymore.
Exactly. It's complicated. And Roof and Singer, in their research, they actually talk about this tension between chasing personal growth and honoring our responsibilities to others.
It's that classic work-life balance struggle on steroids.
Yeah.
How do we pursue our passions without, like, neglecting our duties to others?
Right. And it's not just about external pressures either. Remember Waterman's research on autonomy?
Yeah, the importance of having choices.
Right. He found that even if you love your job, if you feel forced to work late every night, that lack of control can really chip away at your sense of fulfillment.
So even enjoyable activities can feel like a drag if you're not the one in the driver's seat.
Exactly. It really highlights how crucial it is to have agency in our lives, to feel like we've got some say in how we spend our time and energy.
Man, this is already making me want to, like, revamp my entire schedule. But okay, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's recap. Eudaimonic well-being, it's about more than just fleeting happiness. It's about meaning, purpose, growth, and even navigating the inevitable challenges that come with pursuing all that. But where does our own, like, personal life story fit into all of this?
Oh man, that's where things get really interesting. Have you got a minute to dig into this whole narrative identity thing?
Lay it on us.
Okay, so it's this idea that we all create stories about our lives, right? It's how we make sense of things.
Right, like we're all the stars of our own personal movies.
Exactly. And just like in the movies, the way we frame those stories, the stuff we choose to focus on, the meaning we give it all, it drastically affects how we experience our lives.
So, for example, someone who loses their job could either tell themselves a story about failure, or they could reframe it as an opportunity for a fresh start.
Exactly. And you know what? The research shows that people who score high on those eudaimonic well-being scales, they tend to tell stories that emphasize growth, even when things get tough.
So it's not like they've lived charmed lives,
Yeah.
right? It's more like they figured out how to spin straw into gold, narratively speaking.
Yeah, exactly. They find meaning in the messiness of life. They don't let it drag them down.
Which is kind of encouraging, right? Because it means we can actually get better at this whole storytelling thing.
Totally. And the best part is you don't have to be some kind of like literary genius to do it.
So no Hemingway required.
Nah, not at all. Just think of it like editing a movie, right? You can rearrange scenes, you can add stuff, you can even change the music to create a totally different vibe.
Okay, so how do we become expert editors of our own lives then? What's the secret sauce?
Well, it all comes back to those values we were talking about earlier. Remember those 6 dimensions of psychological well-being that Reef and Singer talk about?
Remind me, give me the rundown again.
Okay, so they're like these pillars of a well-lived life, right? Autonomy, environmental mastery, purpose in life, positive relationships, personal growth, and self-acceptance.
6 pillars. Got it.
And what's interesting is they found these things are like deeply connected to happiness and well-being, not just how people felt about their lives, but actual measurable stuff.
So it's not just touchy-feely stuff. It's like backed up by science.
Oh, yeah. It's legit.
Okay, cool. So it's like building a well-balanced breakfast, but for your life, you need all the food groups represented.
100%. And if you're feeling kind of blah in one area, maybe it's time to shake things up a bit.
So like if you're feeling stuck in a rut, maybe you should take on a new project at work or volunteer or something.
Yes, something that gives you that sense of purpose. Or like if you're feeling completely overwhelmed by all your responsibilities, maybe it's time to like set some boundaries or reconnect with a hobby.
Reclaiming that autonomy Waterman was talking about.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance, between engaging with the world and making sure you're taking care of yourself.
So it's not enough to just like go through the motions, right? It's about the why behind what we do.
You got it. And that's what's so fascinating about the Waterman paper. He separates this idea of like surface enjoyment. Think back to that chocolate cake from these deeper activities that truly motivate us because they resonate with our values and challenge us to grow.
Like there's a difference between, say, binge watching a show and losing yourself in a creative project.
Well,
Both could be fun, but one's probably not going to leave you feeling super fulfilled.
bingo. And you know what else is interesting? Waterman found those activities that people found deeply fulfilling. They were often described as challenging, like they took effort.
Which makes sense, I guess. We tend to get more satisfaction out of things we really work for, right?
Right. It's like the more we invest in something, especially when it means something to us, the more rewarding it feels.
And I bet that sense of purpose is crazy helpful when we hit those inevitable bumps in the road.
Absolutely. It's like the goal isn't to like erase the hard parts of our stories, but to like weave them in so they make us who we are.
It's like that Japanese pottery thing, right? Where they repair broken pieces with gold.
Kintsugi?
Yeah, that's it.
I love that. Those imperfections, they become part of the story.
Exactly. They make the piece unique and beautiful.
And I think it's the same with our lives, right? What might have seemed like a total disaster at the time, it could end up being this like turning point that leads to amazing things down the road.
So it's all about embracing the highs and the lows, the good, the bad, the ugly, finding a way to make it all work together.
Yes. It's about creating a narrative that feels both like authentic and meaningful.
Yeah.
Your story.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we even begin to figure out what our values are? Are we just supposed to like close our eyes and hope for the best?
I mean, you could try that, but I think a more helpful approach might be to like think back to times in your life when you felt most alive, most engaged, most yourself.
So like taking an inventory of all the times we felt that eudaimonia thing.
Yeah. What were you doing? Who were you with? Like, what was it about those moments that felt so right?
Like creating our own highlight reel, but for like our souls.
Yeah, I love that. And don't overthink it, right?
Right.
Pay attention to the stuff you're naturally drawn to, the things that energize you rather than drain you. What are those things telling you?
Kind of like that quote, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and then go do that.
Yes. Howard Thurman.
Was it? See, you're the expert.
Well, that's the gist of it. But the point is, when we're in sync with our true selves, it just flows, right? And that energy, it has this ripple effect.
So living a more fulfilling life, it's not just about us. It actually makes the world a better place.
That's the idea.
So we're talking about like sustainable self-care, if that makes sense.
I like that. Yeah, it's like we're tapping into this renewable source of energy that comes from living in alignment with who we really are.
Okay, that makes sense. But I got to ask, I mean, nobody's happy all the time, right?
Yeah.
So how does this whole eudaimonia thing, how does it hold up when things inevitably go sideways?
That's a great question. And you're right, it's not about like achieving this perfect state of perpetual bliss. That's not realistic.
Yeah, life happens, right?
Exactly. And even when life is good, even when you're like crushing it on the eudaimonia scale, there's still going to be challenges, disappointments, you name it.
So then what? The whole thing falls apart.
Not at all. That's where this whole narrative identity thing really comes into play. It's not about what happens to us, it's about how we choose to see it.
So like reframing those negative experiences.
Exactly. You can let them define you, or you can use them as like fuel for growth.
It's like choosing to be the driver of your life, not just a passenger along for the ride.
Perfect analogy. You're going to encounter some detours and roadblocks no matter what, but you get to choose how you respond to them. And that sense of agency, that's huge for eudaimonic well-being.
It's like we're building mental muscles every time we face a challenge and come out the other side, right?
You got it. And that resilience, that gets woven into your story. It becomes proof that you can handle whatever life throws at you.
Okay, I like that. But how do we actually cultivate that kind of resilience? Is it something we're born with, or is it like a learnable skill?
Well, the research suggests a lot of it comes down to mindset. And remember those 6 dimensions of well-being we talked about? Self-acceptance plays a big role here.
Right, accepting ourselves, warts and all.
Yeah.
Easier said than done sometimes, right?
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
But seriously, when we're constantly judging ourselves, when we're trying to live up to this like impossible standard of perfection, that's a recipe for disaster.
We just end up adding to the pressure.
Exactly. And that's where self-compassion comes in. We need to treat ourselves with the same kindness we'd show a good friend who's going through a rough time.
Instead of beating ourselves up for every little mistake.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, right? We're going to screw up, we're going to fall down, but it's how we pick ourselves up that really matters.
It's okay to ask for help too.
100%.
So it sounds like what we're saying here is the goal isn't to be perfectly happy all the time or to have like this picture-perfect life story. It's more about learning to embrace the entire journey.
Yeah.
Like the good, the bad, the messy middle, all of it.
You nailed it. And it's about doing it all in a way that feels true to who you are, you know?
Living authentically.
Exactly. Aligning your actions with your values, pursuing your passions, and most importantly, showing yourself some grace along the way.
Because it's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
100%. And just like with any marathon, there are going to be times when you hit a wall, when you want to give up, when you feel completely lost. That's normal.
Those are the moments that make us want to quit.
Sure. But they're also part of the journey. Just as much as those exhilarating moments when you're like, yeah, I got this.
It's like Rumi said, the wound is the place where the light enters you. Sometimes the things that hurt us the most end up being the things that teach us the most valuable lessons.
Man, I love that quote. And it's so true. When we embrace all of it, the light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, that's when we really start to understand who we are.
This whole conversation has been incredibly eye-opening. Seriously, I feel like we just like dipped our toes into this giant ocean of wisdom.
Right. It's a lot to process.
So for our listeners who are feeling inspired to like dive in a little deeper, what would you recommend as a next step? Where do we go from here?
Well, I always think it's helpful to start with some quiet reflection. Like, what are those values that really resonate with you? What are the things you love to do, even if they're challenging? And then how can you start to bring more of those things into your everyday life?
It's about making those small but consistent choices that add up over time.
Yes. You don't have to overhaul your entire life overnight. Start small, experiment, and see what feels right.
This has been an amazing conversation. Seriously, thank you so much for taking the time to break all this down for us.
Anytime. This stuff lights me up, so it's my pleasure. And hey, remember, the most important step on any journey is the one you take today.
So get out there and start exploring.
Yes. And don't forget to have fun along the way.
And to our amazing listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the nuances of happiness and how to live a truly fulfilling life. We'll be back next time with another thought-provoking conversation. Until then, keep asking those big questions, keep searching for answers, and keep writing your story.